Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty fundamental, I think, to all our lives. Navigating those big life changes, and making significant decisions.
Yeah, the big ones. Career stuff, relationships, just figuring out the next step.
Exactly. And to help us get our heads around it, we're diving into some really interesting excerpts you shared from the book Life is a Startup: What Founders Can Teach Us About Making Choices and Managing Change by Noam Wasserman.
Right. It's packed with insights.
Absolutely. So consider this our mission today. A shortcut, really, to understanding how entrepreneurs, people who deal with uncertainty all the time, how they handle these moments.
And the idea is to take their strategies, their mindsets, and see how they can help you navigate your own turning points. Give you a bit more clarity, maybe some confidence.
Yeah, exactly. And what's great is the book covers so much ground. It's not just about business startups.
No, not at all. It touches on, early career stuff, long-term relationships, changing jobs, moving, even creative projects. Seems like there's something in there for almost anyone thinking about a big shift.
For sure. And it's not just theory, right? Wasserman's work is based on, well, actual research into how entrepreneurs think, loads of interviews.
Mm-hmm. Interviews with founders who've actually, lived through this stuff,
Yeah.
and his own observations of the kinds of dilemmas we all face.
So the plan is to pull out those key takeaways. Some of them are a little surprising, actually, counterintuitive even.
Definitely. We want to see what sets successful entrepreneurs apart and how those principles might give you an edge, help you avoid some common traps when you're dealing with change. We've got some definite aha moments lined up, I think.
Okay, let's get into it then. One of the first things that jumped out, for me anyway, was this idea about the pitfalls of passion. We always hear, follow your passion, right? It's everywhere.
It really is. But the book argues that, well, unchecked passion can actually be a problem. It can lead you astray.
Oh, so?
Well, passion is obviously crucial for getting things started.
Yeah.
It's the fuel. But too much enthusiasm, without like a reality check, it can make you blind to warning signs.
Okay.
Think about Friendster. Remember them. Explosive growth, totally fueled by user excitement, pure passion.
Yeah, I remember. It was huge for a minute.
Right. But their infrastructure, the actual tech behind it, just couldn't handle the load. The site got slow, buggy.
And people left.
Exactly. Push those passionate early users straight to competitors like MySpace and Facebook eventually.
Hmm.
So passion alone wasn't enough. It crashed because the foundation wasn't there.
So the takeaway isn't just passion good, it's more like uncontrolled passion needs a solid plan B, or maybe just a solid plan A.
Precisely. You need to pair that initial spark with, smart execution. Then there's this other story about Akhil and his clean tech startup. He was clearly passionate, really believed in it, and he worked really hard to get his partner, Rupa, on board.
Yeah.
But his approach, it was too intense, too relentless.
And it backfired.
Yeah. The book points out his drive to convince her actually ended up hurting their relationship. Instead of building a strong foundation, a partnership, he was so focused on the hard sell.
He didn't leave space for her concerns, or for them to build it together.
Exactly. His passion was obvious, but the way he went about it lacked that kind of sensitivity, that strategic element needed to build real support.
That really makes you pause and think about, well, your own situations. How easily can your excitement about a new job or a project or even, a relationship,
Right.
how easily can it cloud your judgment? Or maybe even alienate the people you actually need on your side?
It's a critical question.
Right.
How do you keep that fire going, that enthusiasm, but also stay grounded, stay analytical enough to build something that lasts, whether it's a business or, something personal?
Okay, so moving on. Another concept that really struck me was the handcuffs of our own making.
Ah, yes, the handcuffs. These aren't literal, obviously.
Yeah, no. The book describes them as those things we do, commitments we make that seem positive at the time.
Right. Good steps, even.
But over time, they actually end up restricting our freedom, our ability to change direction later on.
Like invisible chains we forge ourselves, often with the best intentions.
Hmm.
Caroline's story in the book is such a clear example.
Tell us about her.
Well, she did everything right, Bought a house, got the mortgage. As her career took off, hired a nanny. Even had deferred compensation coming her way, a reward for sticking around.
Sounds like the picture of success.
Totally. But then she hits this point where she realizes the career itself, while looking good on paper, wasn't actually what she wanted anymore. And all those good things, the mortgage, the nanny costs, the deferred comp, waiting for. They become these huge financial ties. Golden handcuffs, basically.
Making it really, really hard to just walk away or pivot.
Extremely difficult. And it's not just her. Wasserman mentions a study on Australian Air Force technicians. Highly structured environment, clear paths. Yeah, security. But the longer they stayed, the harder it became to leave, even if they wanted something different. Same kind of golden handcuffs feeling.
And it's not always just about money, is it? The book brings up Y Combinator's perspective, saying these constraints pop up everywhere, not just in like traditional careers.
Right. And that example of the Harvard Business School colleague, the handcuffs of prestige, that one really hits home.
Yeah, tell me about that.
The person apparently valued their Harvard connection so much, the prestige of it, that they stayed in a role that wasn't fulfilling. They had another opportunity, maybe a better fit, more impact.
But the pull of the name, the status, was too strong.
Exactly. It shows how non-financial things, like reputation or ego maybe, can box you in just as effectively as a mortgage.
Wow. It really forces you to look inwards, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To ask yourself, what handcuffs, financial or otherwise, might I be wearing right now?
And could you have made different choices earlier if you'd been more aware of how these things build up?
Okay, so if we realize we are wearing some of these self-made handcuffs, how do we get them off? The book does offer some proactive strategies. Christina's story is a good starting point.
Yeah, Christina, before she even launched her clothing company, she was already thinking ahead, trying to minimize future constraints.
How?
Well, she got a signing bonus at a previous job. Instead of, spending it, she aggressively paid down her student loans.
Smart. Recognizing that debt could hold her back later.
Exactly. She saw it as a potential anchor. And it wasn't just the loans. Before launching, she went into, extreme frugality mode, living super cheap in New York City.
To build up a safety net?
To prepare for that income drop that often comes with starting something new. There's also the example of NFL player Ryan Broyles doing something similar, living way below his means to prep for life after football.
So it's this mindset of anticipating future limitations and actively doing something now to reduce their impact.
Right. It highlights how important it is to not just fixate on what you might lose if you make a change,
but to actively work on minimizing those potential losses.
Yes. And to really question if those perceived losses, like, say, the prestige of a fancy job title, are as big a deal as you think they are, especially if a better opportunity comes along.
That resonates with me personally, actually. My own decision to leave Harvard Business School, it felt like a big deal to leave that prestige behind, but I felt the new role offered more impact.
And you had to consciously shift your identity a bit, redefine what mattered most to you.
Yeah, definitely. Which kind of leads nicely into the next idea. Staging your dreams.
Ah, staging. I like this one. Instead of these massive, scary, all-or-nothing leaps,
Right.
the book suggests taking smaller steps, more reversible ones. Kind of like how founders run experiments, get feedback, adjust.
Makes sense. Like Jordana's story. She was working at L'Oreal, but felt this pull towards teaching.
So what does she do? She didn't just quit and enroll in grad school immediately.
No, she sort of dated the field first.
Exactly. Taught on weekends, volunteered, basically tested the waters before committing fully to a psychology program and a career change.
It was low risk, gave her real experience to see if she actually liked it before making that huge jump.
And Wasserman contrasts that with how Akil, the clean tech guy, could have handled things with Rupa.
Instead of the hard sell.
Yeah, he could have staged it, gradually introduced the risks, maybe talked through backup plans, built her confidence step by step instead of overwhelming her.
It's about lowering the perceived risk, right? Letting people, including yourself, get comfortable with the idea gradually.
Totally. And the story of Steve Jobs convincing Wozniak to co-found Apple. That's classic staging.
It wasn't one big pitch.
No, it was a series of steps, like showing him the Atari order, proving they could actually make money from this hobby.
Making it tangible, showing the potential reward.
Right, step by step, overcoming Woz's loyalty to HP and his dad's more traditional career advice.
That was strategic. But staging isn't foolproof, is it? The book mentions Jordana again. Her regret about deferring her psychology program.
Yeah, that's the flip side. She felt pressure from her parents, those financial handcuffs we talked about, and she put her dream on hold.
Which underscores that staging needs to actually move you towards your goal, not just be an excuse to delay because of obstacles.
Critical point. It has to serve your real aspirations.
Okay, so let's say you've staged, you've tested, you're ready. Now you need to communicate this change. How do you pitch it effectively? Especially for, say, a career switch. The book mentions Jeff Smart's pillars approach.
Right, the pillars. It's a framework with three key parts. First, your genuine passion for the new thing. Second, your foundation, the skills and experience you're bringing with you.
The transferable stuff.
Exactly. And third, what's new, the skills you're learning, the fresh perspective you offer.
So you weave these together.
Yeah, into a story. A narrative that shows why this shift isn't random, why it makes sense for you. It connects the dots for whoever you're talking to.
And practice makes perfect, presumably.
Oh, definitely. The book stresses practicing that pitch, thinking about the questions or doubts someone might have.
And addressing those potential gaps proactively.
Yes. Have examples ready. Show how your past experience is relevant, even if it's not obvious on the surface. It's kind of like that dating before marrying idea again, but for jobs.
Using maybe short-term gigs or trial periods to test the fit.
Right. Reversible arrangements before the full commitment. Staging again.
It keeps coming back to that. Now, speaking of choices, the book brings up something interesting. The dark side of having too many options.
Yeah, that paradox of choice. It contrasts it with Trader Joe's strategy, limited selection, but really high sales.
Because too many choices can lead to paralysis or dissatisfaction.
Exactly. Sometimes fewer well-curated options are actually better. And related to that, Wasserman warns against wearing those rose-colored lenses when looking at new situations.
Being overly optimistic.
Even in relationships. He cites research, surprisingly, about higher instability for couples who live together before getting married. Now, that's complex, obviously, but the point is about maybe not seeing potential issues clearly beforehand.
It's a reminder to try and stay objective, realistic, whether it's a job, a move, or a relationship.
Which is precisely why the next point, seeking outside perspectives, is so vital.
Getting advice from people who aren't wearing those same rosy glasses.
Yes, finding those trusted, objective voices who can give you a dose of reality. Like how Airbnb's CEO, Brian Chesky, actively sought advice from top people as his company grew like crazy.
Recognizing that others have probably faced similar stuff.
And their experience is gold. The book also mentions Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman, the start of Nike. That relationship grew from small favors, mutual respect.
Leading to Bowerman offering that frank, honest feedback Knight needed.
Exactly. It's about finding people who will challenge you, give you the tough feedback, not just tell you what you want to hear. Because our own biases, our passion, can easily mislead us, even when we think we're being rational.
And speaking of rational, let's talk about the role of emotion in decision-making. We tend to think good decisions are purely logical, right? Cold, hard facts.
That's the common view.
Yeah.
But the book brings in neuroscientist Anthony Damasio's research, which really flips that idea on its head.
What did he find?
He studied people who, due to specific brain damage, lost the ability to feel emotions. Their intellect, their reasoning skills were totally intact.
Okay.
But they couldn't make good decisions anymore. Their lives kind of fell apart because they couldn't weigh options effectively, couldn't gauge risk properly.
Wow. So emotions aren't just noise. They're actually crucial for sensible choices.
That's the insight. They guide us, help us connect with our values, figure out what truly matters long term. The trick isn't suppressing emotions, it's harnessing them, making them work for you, not against you.
Which brings us, inevitably, to failure. And success, too. The book talks about the fear of failure, how paralyzing it can be.
Oh, massively. It stops people from making necessary changes. The example of the dating ring founders is powerful. They were struggling with scaling back their huge growth ambitions
Wow.
because they were terrified of how it would look. The perception of public failure. That fear almost made them stick with a plan that was way riskier long term.
Interesting. And it contrasts that with Kay's story. After her startup didn't work out, she deliberately paused.
Right. She didn't just jump into the next thing. She understood the danger of repeating mistakes if you don't stop and reflect.
That power of reflection. But inaction has risks too, right? The book mentions Kay regretting not acting on her feelings for a friend.
Yeah, hesitation driven by fear. Sometimes the regret of not doing something is worse than the potential negative outcome of trying.
Okay, but what about the flip side? The perils of success. That sounds counterintuitive.
It does, but it's a real thing. The skills and approaches that get you initial success might not be the right ones for the next stage, for growth.
Like the Chobani example.
Exactly. Huge success, then bam, product recall. Their founder, Ulukaya, was initially reluctant to change his team, the people who got him there. It's that loyalty trap.
Sticking with what worked, even when the game changes.
And that loyalty to early colleagues, even when maybe their skills haven't kept pace with the company's needs.
Mm,
That's common. And I loved the anecdote about the couple who finally bought their dream house,
yeah.
only to find themselves totally overwhelmed by the upkeep, the responsibility. They actually missed their simpler renting days.
Huh. Success bringing unexpected burdens. It really makes you think, how can you prepare better, not just for failure, but for the challenges that might come with achieving your goals?
Good question. How do you anticipate those success problems?
So, if setbacks happen, how do we deal? The book talks about harnessing failure for future strength.
This is key. Great entrepreneurs don't see failure as like a personal judgment. They reframe it. As what? As data, as a learning opportunity. Andy Sparks's view of life as a series of battles, setbacks aren't the end. They're prompts to reflect, maybe find a better path.
I like that. And the quote, it's easy to get stuck in a rut, especially if you're good at what you do. Sometimes a negative event is the kick you need.
Exactly. It forces that reflection. Like Colin Hodge, his dating site got bought unexpectedly. Seemed like a setback maybe, but it pushed him towards something even better.
Or Barry Knowles. His first startup failed. Painful, no doubt.
For sure. But he learned crucial business lessons, and importantly, it motivated him to build a financial cushion before his second, much more successful venture. It's about extracting those lessons, building resilience.
And the Tommy John story. The pitcher with the career-ending injury.
Yeah, that becomes an opportunity because of this experimental surgery. It highlights taking calculated risks plus just sheer determination. And the book even mentions research showing negative emotions like anger can actually be more motivating sometimes than positive ones.
Really, channeling frustration into fuel.
Kind of. The idea is to practice reframing even small setbacks. See life less as an obstacle course, more like a treasure hunt for lessons. Even the tough ones teach you something valuable you couldn't learn otherwise.
And even in really, really dark times, the book talks about finding appreciation.
Yeah, this is powerful.
Yeah.
Drawing on Sheryl Sandberg's experience after losing her husband, her friend Adam Grant suggested something counterintuitive,
What was that?
thinking about how things could actually be worse. And strangely, that led her to this overwhelming gratitude for what she still had.
Wow. Perspective is everything. But, okay, there's a limit, right?
Yeah.
The book warns about the risks of over-persistence.
Absolutely. Knowing when to pivot, when to adapt, even when to quit. That's incredibly hard. Tim Westergren at Pandora Radio is this case study here.
What happened?
A decade of struggle, constant rejections, a lawsuit.
Yeah.
He eventually got to an IPO, but his own ownership was massively diluted.
So, was his persistence genius or foolish?
That's the debate. The book highlights how opinions are really divided. It forces you to ask, how do you know when grit becomes stubbornness? When do you cut your losses?
Tricky. Which leads to the idea of the undo key, making reversible decisions.
Yes. This is about proactively looking ahead, identifying decisions that are really hard to reverse.
Like that early equity split at Zipcar, that was tough to change later.
Exactly. And then, whenever possible, structuring things so you can back out more easily, creating exit strategies.
Like renting before you buy in a new city, or commuting before you relocate for a job.
Practical examples, building in that undo option, thinking about reversibility up front. Though the book does caution, realistically, that setting up these undo keys isn't always simple.
Okay, so let's say things go well, you achieve success. We touched on the perils, but how do you anticipate the challenges of success more actively?
Right, guarding against complacency. Success isn't the end point. We saw Chobani's success lead to production nightmares and that recall. They had to look ahead, adapt.
Barry Knowles at Mastergy did this proactively, didn't he? Warning his execs they might eventually report to someone else.
Yeah, preparing them for future transitions, managing expectations, recognizing that growth changes things. And the book points out money isn't always enough to keep people motivated long term.
John Harthorne at Mass Challenge had that interesting process.
The volunteer to intern to employee model. It was designed to test not just can they do the job, but do they want to do it, assessing ability and motivation.
It comes back to self-awareness again, doesn't it? Knowing when your skills or even your desires don't match where things are heading. And maybe even initiating change yourself, like a founder bringing in a new CEO.
Exactly. For the good of the venture. And if you do find yourself with skill gaps as things grow, the book advises aggressively bolstering your support system.
Meaning, don't just bail immediately.
Right. Think about your intangible value first. Then, actively seek resources, mentors, courses, maybe financial backing to shore up those weaknesses while staying involved.
Like Ulukaya bringing in TBG and experienced execs at Chobani.
Or Barry Nell's deliberately learning specific skills at GTE to prepare for his role at Masergy. It's about targeted development. The book even suggests maybe turning down a dream offer if you don't think the support system is there to handle the challenges.
That's a bold move. Okay, so we've envisioned change, planned for it. Now comes the doing phase. The second part of the book focuses here, starting with our mental blueprints.
Ah, the blueprints. These are our ingrained ways of thinking, reacting, built up from all our past experiences.
Like muscle memory for the brain.
Sort of. The story of the guy learning the backward bike is perfect. Handlebars turn left, wheel goes right. Even after practicing like crazy, overriding that ingrained instinct took immense effort.
So these blueprints are efficient in familiar situations.
Yeah, they're mental shortcuts. But during change, they can really hinder adaptation, especially if we're not aware of them. Sandlin's quote is pretty blunt. Once you have a rigid way of thinking, sometimes you cannot change that.
Even if you want to.
Right. And Kurt Schilling's story, applying his baseball owner's always right blueprint to his gaming company, 38 Studios.
It didn't work out well.
No. It shows how a blueprint successful in one context can fail spectacularly in another. Rethinking them takes ongoing, conscious effort.
And something that reinforces these blueprints is the danger of homophily, our tendency to stick with people like us.
Yeah, homophily. It feels comfortable, safe. But in times of change, it's risky. It limits your perspectives, your resources, your access to different ideas.
The book mentions stats about Clinton and Trump voters mainly talking to like-minded people.
And similar patterns in marriage people, pairing up based on education, religion, race, it's a powerful tendency. And in business, even with talk about diversity, homophily often creeps into hiring and networking.
Like Vivek Kuller's Smartix failure, partly blamed on a too similar founding team lacking key skills.
Exactly. Or VCs being more likely to invest alongside others from the same school or background, even if it's not the best financial move. And Lauren Rivera's research on hiring at elite firms.
What did she find?
That cultural fit, shared hobbies, similar backgrounds often mattered more than concrete skills. Interviewers gravitated towards people like themselves.
So these informal clicks based on similarity can block knowledge sharing.
Definitely. It makes you think, if you started something with just your closest friends, what essential skills or viewpoints might be missing purely because you're all kind of similar?
Okay, so knowing about blueprints and homophily isn't enough. How do we actually redraw them? Rethink routines?
We need concrete reminders,
Right.
like that founder who posted his decision-making weak spots right above his desk, a tangible cue.
Or setting calendar reminders to pause before big decisions where a blueprint might kick in inappropriately?
Practical stuff. Connie Gerzik's research found that structured checkpoints in startups helped counter the negative effects of just rushing ahead. The book even has that 16 decision map, highlighting potential blueprint conflicts in roles, rewards, hiring.
And giving new hires permission to push back, to challenge the status quo.
Crucial for bringing in fresh perspectives. Barry Nell's transition from big corporate GTE to startup Masergy really highlights this. The blueprints were totally different. He needed expert advice to adapt.
Creating a personal board of directors with diverse experience sounds like a great idea too. People who can spot your blind spots.
It's about emulating those successful founders who actually listen to constructive criticism, who doubt their assumptions, not themselves, when things get tough.
But it's hard to fight those automatic responses, isn't it? Even when you know you should.
Very hard. That gorilla suit experiment shows how easily we miss unexpected things when we're focused, or how hard it is to take unaccustomed actions. Expanding your experiences helps different jobs, different cities. It builds flexibility.
Like Tony Tujan initially resisting a co-founder who seemed too different, but who brought vital complementary skills.
Perfect example of overcoming homophily. And Pandora's founder using a checklist to ensure the founding team had all the necessary capabilities covered.
A checklist approach. You could use that for anything, really. Prioritize what's essential.
Absolutely. Like those parents forming a school board, using a checklist to recruit people with diverse expertise, finance, legal, education. And VCs use formal processes, like weekly meetings, to force diverse input and fight homophily in their decisions.
Okay, let's shift to another tricky area the book explores. The pull of involving family and friends, and this allure of striving for perfect equality.
Yeah, these feel like good impulses, right? Working with people you trust, being fair. But the book warns they can be dangerous if you're not careful.
Like that couple whose work fights spilled over and wrecked the business and maybe the relationship.
Exactly. And the stats on family business failure rates are pretty stark. Plus, owner-managers apparently find it really hard to take advice from their spouses. Yet, people do it all the time, involve family and friends despite knowing the risks.
Why? The comfort, the trust.
Probably. But the book lays out three key risks. One, the surprise factor, people act differently at work. Two, it's hard to have tough talks with loved ones. Three, that inevitable spillover between personal and professional life.
The Stanford study showing context changes how we see coworkers really highlights that surprise factor.
Right. And we hesitate to give negative feedback to family, so problems fester. Like that experience survey, newlyweds often not talking about money, leading to stress. It's hard to discuss sensitive stuff, even with spouses.
I remember when my daughter interned for me, I felt awkward giving feedback, more self-conscious around other staff. It's complicated. And then you have extreme examples like the Gucci family.
Toxic. But contrast that with Hillary Mallow, bad experience working with her husband, but a much better one working with her mother later because the structure was different.
Structure matters. And then there's the pull of equality, wanting everything to be perfectly fair.
That equality is fairness, blueprint.
Yeah.
We want to share the good stuff equally. But the book argues strict equality isn't always best. Think teachers, coaches, choirs, differentiated roles are key.
But that pull leads to things like consensus decisions or equal equity splits, which can be disastrous, especially with two founders who disagree.
Totally. And that anecdote about Nancy and Eric, the egalitarian couple always arguing about chores because they were constantly monitoring fairness. It's exhausting.
And the research finding lower stability in marriages with roughly equal incomes, maybe because of that constant monitoring and renegotiation.
Plausible. And David's struggle in his marriage over chores and careers, or Michael feeling resentful in the up-down team despite equal shares because contributions felt unequal. That expectation of equality persists, even subconsciously.
So how do we fight these pulls? How do we work with family successfully or avoid the equality trap?
Learn from Mallow's different structures. The key is to date family friends professionally. Start small. Part-time roles, time-limited projects, clear goals, clear assessments, clear exit plans, maximum reversibility.
Define tasks, end dates, test the waters.
And have those check-in meetings. Talk openly about progress, surprises, challenges, evaluate if it's actually working. Tactful feedback is crucial, and be honest about mismatches between roles and strengths.
Discuss the potential disconnects. Create those firewalls.
Yes. Protect the business and the relationship. Like the Bauble Bar couplepreneurs, Tiers and Ratner. They had a disaster plan. He'd leave if they broke up. And a Geneva Convention for disagreements.
Written rules for conflict. And Mallow having her mother report to someone else a structural firewall.
It's about upfront. Clear talks about separating business and personal. And testing that separation early with direct feedback. Maybe even bring in a third party for tough talks.
And for equality. Avoid the Neverland model of strict egalitarianism.
Yeah. Effective founders set guidelines for fairness that aren't necessarily rigid equality. Strategies like mini Zeus's assign control over domains based on expertise. Arrange tiebreakers proactively. Focus on the long term. Tag team.
Like Allison and John dividing household territories. Or the Pandora team's clear tech versus business split from day one.
Exactly. And have checkpoints to realign roles and rewards as things evolve. In personal life, acknowledge short-term imbalances but aim for long-term parity. Support each other through it, like your tag-teaming childcare example.
Play the long game, basically. In business and life, when things feel unequal short-term.
That's the idea. Which brings us to the final big trade-off the book explores. Rich versus king.
The fundamental tension. Wanting financial success, rich, versus wanting control, king.
And the core argument is, trying too hard to have both can actually limit your potential. Dean Kamen and the Segway is the classic cautionary tale here.
Incredible invention, huge potential.
Massive investment, multiple CEOs. But Kamen's intense desire for control, to be king, arguably squandered the company's potential.
And this isn't just startups, right? This tension is everywhere.
Absolutely. Career choices, autonomy versus salary status, community projects, control versus delegating for speed, art, research, solo work versus collaboration for wider reach. Even relationships, one partner feeling they do all the work, maybe trying to control too much.
The successful people get perspective on this trade-off and on themselves.
Yeah, they figure out what they really value. The book advises against trying to control every step in long-term partnerships. Accept imbalance sometimes. Your own story about trying consulting while prioritizing family, that was a personal rich versus king choice, wasn't it?
It definitely was. And self-awareness was key to figuring out it wouldn't work for me then.
Exactly. It always comes back to knowing yourself.
So, wrapping this up, the core message seems to be that by understanding these entrepreneurial ways of thinking about passion, constraints, planning, relationships, control, we can all navigate our own changes and decisions more effectively.
Yeah, learning from the successes and the failures,
Mm.
and constantly emphasizing self-awareness and seeking those diverse, objective perspectives to challenge our own thinking.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Think about that rich versus king trade-off in your own life right now. Is there an area where you're maybe prioritizing control, being the king, when letting go a bit might actually lead to greater overall wealth, financial, personal impact, whatever wealth means to you?
And what's one small step, maybe even a slightly uncomfortable one, you could take this week just to explore what the other side of that balance might look like?
Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for diving in with us.